In this video, you're going to learn about methods. Now, what exactly are methods? A method is essentially a chunk of code that's given a name that you can call over and over again. Now, methods are extremely useful because you can quite imagine that there are certain parts of code that need to be called over and over again during the life of an application. For example, if you need to send an email from your application, that instead of retyping the functionality for the email every single time you need it, you simply wrap all the functionality for sending an email into a method, and you'll give the method a name, for example, send email. So whenever you need to send an email from your application, you simply call that method, and the method will do what it's supposed to do, or what you've programmed it to do. Now, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to create some very basic types of methods. All right. Now, you create a method. I'm going to set the visibility of my method to public, meaning this method will be visible within this class and outside of this class. And I'm going to set this method as a static method. Now, why am I using the keyword static? The keyword static means that this method will be itself static. In other words, we will not need to create an instance of this class. Now, class instantiation, object-oriented programming is coming later on in later lessons. So for now, just understand that you don't have to instantiate this class methods in order to run this this method. Okay, so we'll call this one show message, and all this method will do is that it will display a message dialog box. And it'll probably just say hello everyone. All right. Now, a method, as I said, can be run over and over and over again, but a method will not do anything until you call it. All right. So if I run this program, for example, it will do absolutely nothing. Let's test that. We need to save it, methods.java, perfect. Hopefully there are no issues. All right, there is an issue. It needs a return type. I forgot that. The return type will be void. I'll explain this shortly. All right, no more issues. Now, as you can see, I've run my code, but it's done absolutely nothing. And the reason for that is because a method is a chunk of code that's simply sitting there waiting for us to call it. So let's call this method. Now, this is how you call a method. You call its name, followed by the open and close parentheses, and then your semicolon. All right, let's try this method now. There we go. I've called the method, and the method outputs this message dialog box that simply says hello everyone. Now, the other thing about a method is it will not work until it's called, and then you can call it as many times as you want. All right, so I'm calling this method 4 times. And as you can well imagine, it's going to show my message dialog box 4 times. One, two, three, 4, and that's it. So now a method, as I mentioned, it's important to remember it will never do anything until it's called, and then you can call a method as many times as you require. Now, this method that we are looking at, let's call up our line numbers. This method from line 5 through 7 is just one type of method. This method does not take in any information, and it does not return any information. Now, let's create a method that's a little more descriptive than this one, that actually takes in information. This one will also be a static method. It'll also be void. I'm going to call this one show message with text. Alright, now this method is going to be different from the first one because it's actually going to receive a parameter, and the parameter will be of type string. Now what exactly this is going to do is, when we call this method, we need to send the method a string, and that string will be stored in here. That's why we're declaring a variable of type string in here. So that string will be automatically assigned to the keyword or the variable name message, and whenever we need to use that string inside this method, we simply call message. So let's watch how we're going to use this. I'm going to simply copy this line here. Right, so this method is going to display a J option pane show message dialog, but with one major difference. It's going to use the variable message. Alright, now how are we going to populate the variable message if it's inside that method parameter list? Now we do this when we call the method. So let's call that method. We don't need this many calls to show message. In fact, we don't need any calls to show message. So we're gonna call show message with text, and we're gonna pass this method a string. Alright, and whatever we are passing to this method via this method call will be stored as the message variable, and whenever we need to use the variable message, we simply call it, just like any ordinary variable. So let's compile this code. Alright, so there we go. We've called this method show message with text. We passed it hello method. Now what this method did was, essentially it worked like a little factory. It took in this input and it plugged it in there, and the show message dialog, hence it had the message that we sent. So there we go, hello method. Now we can change this this message to whatever we want, or we can even acquire a message from the front end, from the user directly. Take that message that we get from the user, plug into this method call, and the method will simply place that message in here. And remember, the name that I've given this message here is an arbitrary name. You can name it whatever you want, but it's always nice to name your variables in Java with some sort of meaningful name that you can understand what this variable is intended for. Alright, so that's the second type of method. Let's look at a third type of method, a type of method that returns some information. Alright, so the third type of method will be public static. Instead of void, it'll say string, because a string method, this method will actually return some information in the form of a string. Alright, we'll call this method compose message. And this method will receive a parameter, as you can see. That parameter will be username. So what exactly does this method do? This method will simply take in a username and concatenate with it some string, some text. So we'll return the word hello concatenated with the username that's coming in. Alright, so let's give this a test. What's going to happen here is, when we call this method, we're going to pass it a username. The method is going to combine the word hello with the username and send back that string, hello username, and it'll be sent back in the form of a string. So what we need to do is, we need to store the information coming back into a string. So let's go into the main method. So we'll create a string variable. We'll call it composed, let's start something, composed message is equal to. Now how do we get our composed message? We simply call compose message. Let's start something again. And we pass this method a name. Alright, so let's explain what's going to happen here. The first thing that's going to happen is Java is going to create a string variable called composed message. Alright, then we're going to call this message, we're going to call this method. This method is going to take this name Tom, which is going to be assigned to this variable username. Then it's going to attach the word hello to the username. So in essence, it's going to return hello Tim, and hello Tim is going to be assigned to composed message. Now let's do something interesting. We'll output composed message via this the previous method that we created, show message with text. Okay, now this is very interesting. We're using one method to get some information, which is the composed message variable, and then we're using another method to display that information. Now we can use methods in this way. In fact, methods can use each other, methods can call each other. Alright, let's compile this code. Alright, so hello method, that's the first box. And let's look at this one, hello Tom. Now look at this output. It seems simple enough, but we had to go through quite a process to get this output here. The first thing we did was we passed this method compose message the word or the name Tom, which was plugged in there, and then we combined the word Tom with the word hello, so it became hello Tom, and we returned this to the calling code. We returned it to line 20, and we stored it into this variable, string type variable, composed message. The next thing we did was in line 21 we called another method, show message with text, and we passed it this variable composed message. In other words, we passed it the text hello Tom. So it took this message, this string hello Tom, it stored it in a variable called message, and then it simply called J option pane show message dialog, and it output the message. Now let's look at these three types of methods once again. The first type of method that we created, it's a void method, meaning it sent back nothing, and you can see the parentheses next to the method name are empty. That means it received nothing. So it took in no information and it sent back no information. The second method, show message with text, it's set at void. Now void means that this method doesn't send back any information. Alright, it just takes in information and that's it. So it took in a string type variable called message, and all it did was it output that message. Now let's look at the third type of method. This third type of method, we can see it's public static string. Now the keyword string here indicates that this method sends back some data. Alright, and the string username parameter inside the brackets indicates that this method also takes in information. So this is quite different from the previous two methods in the sense that it takes in information and it sends back information. So this method, you can see, is an information processor. It takes in something and outputs something else, and what it's doing is simply it's attaching the word hello to the string that it's taking in, and then it returns this information using the keyword return. The keyword return simply says that this method is now sending back this information. Now this information is sent back to wherever it's called from. So if we call it from line 20, compose message, we send off the information Tom. The information is processed here in the method, and then it's stored into this variable composed message. So this is how it works with methods. Remember, methods will simply sit there and do nothing. until they are called. Now there's lots of different types of methods, and also when you look at the parameters of a method does not only receive one parameter. If you wanted this method to receive more than one parameter, you could simply put in the parameters. So for example, if we wanted this method to receive a string username and an integer as well, then what we simply do is add the int age thereafter and separate each parameter with a comma. But remember, a method can only return one data type. One item can be returned. So any number of information can be taken in, but only one item can be returned. It could be an int, it could be a string, it could be a custom data type, no matter what, but it has to be only one item. So much for methods.